Hey everyone. The nature of this video is that Mansur is trying to get reasons why this atheist he's talking to doesn't believe in Allah. To help me with this tonight, I have with me Rob from Speakers Corner UK channel. Welcome back, mate. Nice to have you here with me.
Hey, good to be back. And yes, welcome and hello to everybody who will be listening to this video.
Cool. All right. Well, we're just going to jump straight in and we'll see what Mansur's got for us.
Take that risk.
I'm not sure there is a thereafter. That's a risk in itself already.
Okay.
So
you're saying... Okay.
By then, if I die and there is a thereafter, I've already lost probably anyway, so then the purpose is secondary to that.
Yeah, but you're still thinking that there's a possible loss, and you're willing to take that risk.
I don't know if it's a possible loss.
So you're certain there's no loss?
No, because I think, in a sense, if there isn't anything and I'm dead, there's nothing to gain.
Are you certain there is nothing?
Nothing is certain in life.
So you're not certain that you could be in loss? So it's possible that you might be in loss?
Sure, yeah.
Right, and you're willing to take that risk?
Passively, sure, yeah.
So why don't...
This sort of implication that's coming from Mansur is, if there is such a risk, well, you don't know what that risk would be. For him to be having the risk which Mansur is implying, in other words, burning in hell because you don't believe in Allah, well, even if there is an afterlife, there's no telling what that would look like. There's no telling whether that's going to be Allah or any of the other kind of religions that talk about an afterlife, or whether it could be something completely different. And that's before you've even got to being able to demonstrate that there is an afterlife. So this is a really terrible apologetic in my view.
Yeah, I think there's, and you also need to add into what you're saying, you've got all of these religions, there's different conceptions of afterlife, and some don't have an afterlife. But the other thing is, even if you were to go with this so-called risk, the idea that you're going to believe it on that grounds, I think if there is some sort of God and he knows your heart, then all you're doing is a gamble. You're not doing it because you believe him. You're doing it out of fear that, hey, there might be this, small chance that one of these afterlife is true. And so I think you've also got this idea of not being pure of heart, not doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, and also, who's to rule out the possibility that only atheists actually go to the afterlife? It maybe the test, I think we talked about this before in other videos, but maybe the test is don't be taken by all these, unconvincing claims. I'm not going to buy this because there's no evidence. What if that's the test? And then let's presume that God is going to put you in an afterlife based on your rationality. I mean, you can't rule that out. So, I mean, you could say that Mansur has taken the same risk by believing in the Quran.
Yes, correct. And also, atheism per se doesn't rule out an afterlife. It just says that, you don't believe in God, or there are no gods, depending on how you define atheism. But there's nothing inherent in atheism that rules out some sort of afterlife. So that's the other side of this sort of thing.
To do that in your everyday life here, in your exams, in your job interviews and so on. Why don't you do that? Why do you act differently, inconsistently?
Because...
Right, sorry, I know I've just stopped it, but I have to stop it there again, because, again, this is such a bad analogy. Now, anyone who's watched Dawah for any kind of length of time knows that analogies are possibly their weakest point. Now, he's trying to compare the sort of claimed risk of not believing in a God is the same as like, doing an exam or going for an interview or something like that. Now, that's a completely different type of risk, because the point is, if you're having a job interview or you're going for an exam or some kind of test, that test is there already. It's down in front of you, and you already have the reward of victory and the loss of failure are already spelled out before you started. It's not making some baseless claim which you can't demonstrate. So it's completely disanalogous. So it's stupid right off the bat, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. A lot of those things are probability based, and interviews, jobs, and things in the everyday world, humans will just sort of come up with some probability of X and so forth. But the probability, especially if you don't believe, obviously from my point of view, it's basically near, if not zero itself. So there the probability is, so small that it's just inconceivable. And I think, yeah, as you say, pointing out, trying to use these analogies is deeply flawed. And what he hasn't spelt out, is the inconsistency.
Okay, let's carry on, because this gets worse.
Because I choose to.
Risk in everything.
Yeah, there's a risk in anything.
But you're not taking that risk. Have you been to a job interview where you know nothing about this job?
Maybe there is a difference between having risk and you dealing with the risk. I mean, you respond to the risk. Do you remain calm when there is a risk, or you take some step to properly respond to the risk.
No, but I think there is. I've gone to a job interview unprepared because I'm like, I don't know if this job is for me.
Yeah, so there is a preparation. I mean, it's not like that you say that there is a risk of failing in the interview, but you do not read or take preparation. So,
yes, but the point is, if you go for a job interview, there is only going to be one of two results. Either you're going to get the job or you're not going to get the job. It's all plainly laid out there in front of you. You know what the reward is, you know what the risk is. It's so disanalogous to be talking about compared to an afterlife, which, number one, you can't demonstrate. Number two, you don't even know it would be a risk saying that you wouldn't get there by not believing in it. That would take that extra assumption that Islam is true or some other religion like Christianity is true that sort of believes a similar thing about hell. So it's just so far off the mark to say that these are in any way comparable.
Yep, absolutely agree. The risk, the risks are just so different. And for me, I don't even think about that sort of thing. I don't know about you, about the afterlife or whatever. But like I say, just reiterating the point before, it's not like you can make yourself believe it. So you can claim it, and if there is a God, he's going to know that you're just doing it, as like a gamble.
Exactly.
And that's, if it's a good God, he presumably is going to admit you, or he's not going to look favorably upon you if you just did a gamble.
Yeah, exactly. And this is another weakness. I mean, I think the Pascal's wager, which is essentially what this is, a very poor version of it. It's seriously flawed in a number of ways, but the one that you just mentioned is one that I don't think is brought up enough. The fact is that if you're just kind of faking it, sort of, hoping to fake it till you make it to heaven or something, surely a God is going to be able to know the sincerity of that, and therefore you're going to strike out and lose anyway. So it just makes no sense.
There's a response.
Why do you take that preparation? Why do you make that preparation?
For the job interview, I suppose because I want to get the job.
Yeah,
so
you try to minimize the risk. That's a normal, natural response.
It is known that you can get the job. It's not known that you can get like a second life. So there's a very big difference between the job.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the other atheist guy is just pointing out there, there's no knowledge about whether you're going to get a second life or not. This is all just claims you're making, which you can't demonstrate. So therefore, there's no good pointing to, say, doing a job or having an exam or something like that when there's concrete, tangible results, which you can demonstrate by the millions of people who've gone for job interviews before you. That is a good enough track record to say, yes, we're going to know the outcome of this. Afterlife, it's just a baseless claim as far as I've never come across any evidence for it. Don't know about you, Rob.
No, I don't have any evidence for it either. And, like I say, just can't make yourself believe it. But it's a bit like, I guess, if you were going for astronaut selection, let's say anybody who's watched The Right Stuff, that great movie from, the early 80s or whatever, the probability of getting through there is exceptionally low. Now, one of two things, either you just go full out and prepare your entire life, or you realize that it's highly unlikely you're going to get through, and so you just go, with like a hope, but you don't like take a lot of preparation. The probability is low, so I'm not going to do much. I'm just going to go and have a go at it, right? That's the sort of thing. Unless you think you're the person who is going to, go all the way through and you spend the next 2 years of your life preparing and whatever the case is, but most people won't. And the probability that you're going to be the right one is very low. But again, most people think I'm going to be the right one. And that's like just mistaken thinking from a probability standpoint, unless you know all the criteria and you know that you can meet them all. But if you don't know that, then you're going to be by, just by probability itself, not one of those who are selected. And I think it's the same sort of thing here. Why waste our time with this? If it happens, great. We'll deal with it, when it comes. But and which one is going to be correct, and so on and so forth. So it's just not worth our time, versus the so-called risk.
Yeah, and I'd even take that a step further, because I would say, to make that analogy even tighter, it would be to say that you imagine doing all that, putting in all that effort to become an astronaut without even knowing if you have a spaceship. Because that's essentially what I see this as. You've got no evidence that you've even got a spaceship to step into. So why would you bother putting in all that time for to become an astronaut?
Interview and dying, I think.
The hereafter and the loss in the hereafter is actually a bigger loss. It's a bigger risk, bigger loss.
If you can demonstrate Islam is true, then you could make that claim. Otherwise, you are so many steps away from that. You can't even demonstrate an afterlife. So that's just a really poor answer.
That's correct. And also the sort of afterlife, because some people, I came across them at some point, think that the afterlife is finite. You know, I think the majority of at least Christians and Muslims think it's an infinite afterlife. You know, once you get to heaven or whatever the case is, it's forever. But there's some people who don't believe that. Other religions don't necessarily have that either. So we don't even know about that side of it either. So there's a lot of assumptions that are built into his sort of question that it's a much bigger loss. It depends on what sort of afterlife, because if it was hell, you know, that's not going to be great. So, you know, if it's heaven, depending on the sort of heaven it is, maybe it's the sort of heaven where you get so bored you want to, you know, annihilate yourself, that sort of stuff. There's just a lot of assumptions built in here that it just isn't, for me at least, worth the risk, or that I'm actually going to believe it for the reason of taking a risk.
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned that, the whole thing about, you know, boredom in heaven to the point where you'd want to self-annihilate. That was actually done. I don't know if you ever saw this television show, this comedy show called, what's it called? The Good Place. It was a comedy that was from a few years ago. And it's essentially people went up in the afterlife in the good place. But it's that exact same scenario where they've been there for so many eons that all the things that's supposed to give them pleasure have just become so boring that the only way to give the afterlife meaning, essentially. Sorry, this is spoilers for the show. Anyone who has not seen the show and wants to, stop listening now. But like the ultimate crux of it is to say that to give the afterlife meaning, they had to have the option to be able to check out permanently from it. And once you'd experienced everything you'd wanted to do, you could then self-annihilate. Then heaven would be worth doing. So it was really interesting that it did it in the show, because that's exactly how I could imagine it. I can't see how living forever under those circumstances, even if it's supposed to be that pleasurable, it wouldn't at some point just become, been there, done that, you know, done it forever kind of thing. So yeah, and he's you know, there's no way to know if an afterlife will be like that. So again, it's as you say, just a million assumptions built into this, none of which he can, you know, justify.
If I were to believe that that's what happens,
he knows there is a job, but he doesn't know there is a life after.
Even if you do not believe, in whatever is coming after your death, you have certain possibilities that this can be a viable possibility that we land up in a bad situation.
Possible. Should I start fake believing in the? This is Pascal's wager that you're doing.
You need not to believe.
So it was good. See, he brought that point up, as you say, Rob, when you know mentioned about should I, you know, the atheist guy said, should I fake believe? And it's absolutely right. I mean, what good would that do? I mean, what kind of
and also let's just see if they've got anything to say about it, right? What are they going to say in response to that?
Yeah, okay, let me play it.
What is certain, but yet if you consider the possibility that there is a possibility.
What you're doing, this is Pascal's wager. I should believe purely because the downside of not believing is not worth it.
Like in interview, you are not certain that you will fail.
But I'm certain that someone will get the job.
We're talking about you.
So I think he's basically just avoided it, hasn't he? He hasn't really given.
Yeah, he hasn't responded to it at all. And that's where, if you say something, you notice they're not responding. And I do it a lot now, but it takes experience to do it. I obviously do it online. I'm mostly on Clubhouse. You just ask the question again. Hey, I said this. You didn't respond to it. Are you accepting that that's a good point I made? Get them, push them to either respond or concede. And sometimes I just won't move on. We're not moving on unless you concede that I've made a point that you don't have a rebuttal to. I want everybody to hear that who's listening, so that they don't move on, because it's so easy for these people to do it, and it's a dishonest tactic.
You and your faith.
I prepared knowing that if there's 10 people interviewing or 100, one of us will get it.
But you don't know that maybe no one is selected. Yeah.
Does it happen?
I suppose so, yeah.
No, it does happen.
Yeah, that's fine. But
we had recently, I conducted some interviews, and we didn't select any of those people from the interview.
I mean, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but
yes, it's irrelevant. I don't know why they're going on to this now.
I don't know.
So before happening, you are not certain, but yet you take the preparation to minimize the risk. So that's the natural response to any human being.
Yeah, but
if someone says that okay, there is a risk, but I will not take any.
Okay, let's get one step backward then. Do you believe you exist?
It's already a question. We could be in a simulation.
What is your personal take on
I
that?
think I exist. I haven't thought deeply about it. I wake up every day, so I guess I exist. Sure, yeah.
So you're not. So
There's a degree of existing happening.
do you not find that interesting? Because going after money, woman, job, all this drugs and rock and roll, you do that every day. But you don't do that every day thinking about the existence and reality. Who you are, where do you come from, what's going to happen to you.
Yeah, just stop it there. We're going to do it anyway. Go on.
Yeah, you go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you do all of those things just like he does and just like everybody else does. No, you don't think about who am I, where did I come from, whatever. That's just not something that most people pay attention to, and rightly so. People have got a life. It's not like you're a millionaire where you can sit back, or you're a philosopher, and this is not a slight against any philosopher, where you've got the time to ponder all of these sort of questions. They're just not that important for most people. It's your life, your family, your community, whatever it might be, and those are far removed unless it's a field of study of yours. So to point this out to somebody, he doesn't do it either, I'm sure, and he'll just talk about it here as if it's some great philosophical thing, or people should be doing this more. It's like, why aren't you doing it? For all the reasons that I just gave. So again, it's like, it's a silly point almost.
I was actually going to, I agree with that, but you can also take it from the other point of view, is that how does Mansur know that he doesn't ponder these questions sometime? I mean, yes, obviously when you're in the middle of doing things and engaging in your life, you're not doing it, but who's to say that this guy doesn't think about where everything came from when he's sitting down at home of an evening? He might ponder those questions. So he's just making assumptions just because he doesn't believe in a God. He doesn't wonder about the universe. That's a massive assumption.
Yeah, that's true.
You see, it's not every day that you think about the real big questions. So what I'm saying is, your friends are asking, invite your friends back and say, look, this is something that every one of us individually, by our own self, have to get the answers. Sure. Yeah. Which needs to be convincing to our own.
Well, do you have to get the answers? Because to go back to your point, Rob, as you say, most people probably don't ponder these questions, and they just live their lives and they pass away, and that's it. And it goes to the next generation. So you don't have to think about these things, as most people don't. So again, it's just, he makes these statements as if they are axiomatic, and they are just not. It's just what he thinks about the world, and he can't give any reason to say why must you think about them. He hasn't given that reason. Well, I mean, other than he'll say, oh well, otherwise you're going to go to hell. But since you can't demonstrate that, why should people think about it? You've not given
exactly right for all the reasons you and I have mentioned. It's just not that important to most people ultimately. And so he'd have to show a reason, like a strong argument that yes, you should think about this because X, Y, and Z. And what he's trying to do here, and it's just obviously hasn't worked, is you should think about this because of the afterlife, right? But it's just not something in most people. It's not even something in these people's awareness unless they go to pray or something like that. And that's again why they got to pray so often, because it's easy for the human being just to forget about all of these things. So what does the religion do for them? It keeps them on the short and narrow because they can't do it themselves. So the religion has to try and make them do it. I mean, that just says a lot about human psychology and what we value. So
that's very true.
Himself, not convincing to him.
I have to get the answer for me.
Sure.
Not for anyone else.
Exactly.
As long as my answer is satisfactory to myself.
Exactly. So now, let's make things very simple. As we exist and we understand that you're not a hyper-skeptical in which you don't believe that you don't exist. You have some degrees of understanding that there is existence. You exist and I exist. If such an existence exists, right? Could there be a time in the past? Doesn't matter how remote it is, how far it is, where there was absolutely nothing.
In theory, sure.
If that is the case, how does something come out of nothing?
You should ask the physicists.
The physicists say the same thing.
Well, it was good. It was good that he immediately said, "Ask the physicist." I thought that was a great little answer that he squeezed in.
Yeah, especially for somebody that hasn't thought about this. Now, there's a couple of points here. Number one, this absolutely nothing business. I don't think there's any good reason for anybody to believe that such a state of affairs has ever existed. And I speak to my colleagues on a Clubhouse about this as well. So I would reject that idea out at the outset, right? The question has got a premise I don't accept, right?
I would too. Yeah, you're talking about that absolute, philosophical nothingness,
Correct.
then yes, I would agree with that as well. I hold that position.
Now, if you're talking about some other version of nothing, I'll quote it here because I happen to have it in my notes, because whenever I have chats, this comes up every so often. But there's a world-renowned physicist called Alexander Vilenkin, and here's what he was quoted. Here's the words that he quoted, because I've got this from Skydive Phil's video, and I wrote it out word for word for these sort of people, right? And here's what he says about nothing. When we say nothing in this context of the universe, coming from nothing, tunneling from nothing, we don't mean quantum vacuum. Here we have a state without space completely, so there is no vacuum. So that's his understanding of nothing. And from that, he does believe that universes can spontaneously come into existence, uncaused, I might say. Right? That's Alexander Vilenkin's view. A universe that comes from the state that he explained there, without space completely and no vacuum, and a spontaneous universe such as the one we have can come forward, right? So, but now the theist is going to start arguing the point about nothing, right? They're going to try and go with a philosophical nothing. I'm just going to reject that idea, and I'm going to say, if you reject this idea, then we just stop talking about nothing, because I don't accept yours. I accept what the physicist, like he does. They're the best sort of the people to be informed about this. And so I'm going to go with their sort of ideas. Now, I don't necessarily take Vilenkin as being the authority in the field, because there's a lot of physicists who think that the universe didn't have a beginning. It didn't spontaneously come out of anything. The universe has always existed in some form. So that's another view out there. I'm agnostic about it, but I can argue even from this point of view, the physics point of view, the physicist who thinks the universe can spontaneously come into existence, it can happen out of nothing, just a different definition of nothing. But a fairly reasonable one, I would suggest.
Yeah, and this is the point, which is why I like the fact that the atheists have said, look, go ask the actual people who study this, the scientists who are kind of involved in trying to work out these questions. There's no point in trying to get a scientific answer from a layperson. So I like the fact that he's kind of pushed in that direction, because Mansur, he'll act as if like, oh, well, if you can't answer this, I've somehow won. And it's like, no, it's just, especially from, Mansur, who has absolutely zero scientific knowledge other than what's on his Dawah script, which is usually some bastardization of or quote mining of what some scientists have said. So I do like the way that he's kind of just pushed the ball away. He says, look, it's outside my field of knowledge, let's move on, which I think is a completely reasonable thing to do in that kind of conversation.
Nothingness cannot make anything. Something cannot come.
Maybe the universe is eternal.
So it's not that.
So there was never a start.
That's fine. So the idea or the concept that there was some nothingness at one point and then universe came, it's not logical or reasonable. So there has to be something always in existence. And you postulated that the universe has always been there. So it doesn't need to.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's take that model. The universe is always existing. Has the universe undergone transformation, changes?
I guess so, yeah.
Exactly, it has been. The universe is expanding. For any transformation to happen, what do we need? Can this tripod?
Yes, it can.
Can this tripod make your jacket, which says work in progress?
Yes.
Again, these stupid. We see this over and over again. Oh well, you need a designer, therefore you need a creator god, therefore you need Allah. I mean, this is the steps he's making. I think this guy does try to sort of play along with this argument, but the idea that an inanimate object there is going to suddenly like transform into his coat or can create it. I mean, it's just kind of a non sequitur statement to begin with. I don't know what you think about it, Rob.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But I'm just, when he asked that question, I'm just going to say, if I were there, I'm going to say I reject the premise of your question. That's like asking me how tall is Tuesday. I'm just rejecting the premise of your question. Rephrase the question. Otherwise, we just move on. So that's the way I'm just going to ignore like ridiculous questions like that, because to me that question is almost nonsensical. I understand the words that are being used, but it's like asking somebody how tall is Tuesday. What, like 2.5 meters or what?
You've got to have a minimum coherence, really, to carry on. But I think he does play along for a little bit. So let's see what he says.
Realistically, there is a
How?
That's quantum physics. Anything can happen at any
Quantum physicist, you may be a mathematician. Now tell me, how do you explain by statistical probabilities and alluding to quantum physics, that a material object with no consciousness, no will or volition or ability, can make a jacket as it is like that with the English words written work in progress. I'd like to hear some good explanations which are coherent and meaningful.
Yeah, just stop it there for a second.
Any coherent and meaningful.
Yeah, that's, you see what happens now. Look at the people laughing in the background here. This is a grandstanding type of thing that if you buy into, what they want to do is make the person look foolish. But the question itself was one that he shouldn't have accepted at the outset, right? And then you get all this laughing in the background by probably lay people who can barely follow a conversation themselves. And this is the sort of tactics that they use down there. And the best way is just not to fall into that sort of tactical back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think he might be trying to go along with, you know, I'm trying to work out why he's even entertaining this, and the best I can think is that maybe he's come from the point of view of, okay, like in an infinite universe, maybe those molecules could rearrange themselves into something that could form something like my coat, you know, saying that it's within the realm of kind of physical possibility, since we're all made up of basically the same kind of molecules, atoms, electrons, protons, etc. So maybe that's where he's going from with that, kind of like what's that thought experiment, like the Boltzmann brain. Have you heard of that, Rob? Where it's
look, I accept that you could say, but the way he phrased it was, can this tripod make the jacket? Now, if he had said, could the jacket come into existence without a maker, then yes, I'm going to say yes. Given enough time, such a state, as I understand it, is anything that's logically possible, given either an infinite amount or an extraordinary amount of time, can or even will, by some physicists' lights, come about. But when you phrase it like, can this tripod make the jacket, I'm just going to reject the premise of the question there.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's see what he says.
I'm expecting, I'm not demanding.
Well, it sounded like you were demanding.
No, I'm not.
But I'm not a quantum physicist, but I think by chance, if you have an infinite number of opportunities in one of them, that will happen.
So you believe in the probability statistics where, given enough time, everything is happening. Possible.
For that, initially you need the options to be existing. Like if you toss a coin, the possibilities are already ingrained in the design of the coin. You know, the head or tail. So likewise, you have to have initial design of the possibilities. Otherwise,
no. Again, so he's snuck in that word. You have to have design. No, I mean it's true that we can use statistics and make probabilistic predictions about a future, but that doesn't mean that you need, like he's suggesting that Allah has put into the coin the ability for it to flip into head or tail, like it's built in probabilistically. You've smuggled in God with no justification to that.
Because I don't need to be able to calculate possibilities for anything to happen.
But you need in the setup the possibilities. Like you cannot get.
But if the possibilities are infinite, I don't have to specify any specific.
No, you need a certain level of specification. Otherwise,
no, because if I say the options are infinite, then I don't need to specify a specific one. But gentlemen, we are going on our way.
Yes.
I'm showing my friends around town. I would like to thank you.
Okay.
You haven't read the Quran, have you? None of you.
I've read part of the Quran.
Why don't you open up the Quran and read and ask questions about it? Because this Quran asks you to think about the existential questions that we are just about to discuss.
By the way,
no, it doesn't. It really doesn't. Basically, you just have a bunch of phrases in the Quran which amounts to, when you look around the world, isn't it obvious God made it? That's not asking you to truly ponder. That's basically saying the answer is already there, so you don't really need to think about it. It is this look at the trees kind of meme, essentially. But again, the Dawah guys will always make it sound like the Quran is saying, oh, no, it's encouraged you to really think critically about the world. I remember having a conversation a few years ago on Discord where this Muslim guy had put about a dozen of these phrases from the Quran as kind of evidence that it's asking people to think critically. And every single one was just a variation of, it's obvious that this is from God, therefore you should believe it. And that's how it's all phrased. So I just wanted to emphasize that.
I actually agree with that. My interpretation of it is, ponder the book, such that you'll accept that it's true. Not ponder the book and see whether it matches reality, but rather it does match reality. You just got to ponder and reconcile the two. And that's a very different way of doing it. That's my interpretation. And I agree. I don't even know if they actually believe what they're saying here. But if they do, I just think they've got a mistaken or a wrong or an interpretation that I don't accept of those particular verses, just as you quite rightly said.
Well, and I will challenge any Muslim listening to this. If you have a Quranic verse which you think is asking you to genuinely think critically and try to work out the world for yourself, if you have a verse, put it in the comments and I will show you how it's not, because I've done this before with every verse that I've come across. You can show that it's the complete opposite. It's telling you not to think.
Even if you take the infinite possibility are there, I mean, you should have some certain consistent explanation for that. Why that infinite possibilities exist? Yeah. Yeah.
Even the precondition needs rules.
Okay, thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.
Just to explain then what we're talking about in terms of infinite possibilities. If there were no initial set rules or conditions, can anything happen in any way, any meaningful way?
So the problem is that you need to have in the setup of infinite possibilities, there could be many types of infinities. So you have to have specific types of infinities at the first place. Second one, even if there are infinite number of possibilities, then to have a unfolding of a certain ways of events from this possibility, set of possibilities, you have to have a rule for that. Otherwise, you usually say that sometimes a potato can become human or human can become a potato. It will be random everywhere. I mean, you cannot have a certain certainty in anything. I mean, you cannot do anything in real life. So that's absurd, or that's inconsistent to whatever we see in the...
Yeah, I mean, I was just about to stop it and say, can you work out what the fuck he's talking about? Because this just sounds like gibberish to me.
Something like, if you can't have certain, you can't do things. People don't work on certainty. And in fact, I've got a friend of mine, I think successfully argues that there's little to anything that you can know for certain. That is, that you couldn't be mistaken about. And even the things that you think you can, you're relying on the classical laws of logic, which are axioms themselves, and you're presupposing that. If those were not true, would we be able to even have this conversation in the way we are? So there's presuppositions built in. So this whole thing, if I'm understanding it correctly, is obvious nonsense. People don't need certainty to believe things. In fact, most people believe on far less scant evidence, by our lights at least, including these guys. So I don't know why he's appealing to this.
The real world. So that's why this invoking of infinite possibility is no longer, does not help anyway in this scenario. It is just trying to, wash out the rational confusion. That's all.
Well, no, I mean, if he's talking about the scenario of, say, not the tripod making the jacket, but if the molecules rearranged themselves so it became, a similar item, I think his point still stands. I don't think there's anything logically wrong with that. If you recognize that it's basically made up of the same molecules, then logically it's possible if you do have an infinite amount of time. So I don't see how he thinks he's countered what I think the atheist was saying in that point.
Okay, let's hope our audience, those who are listening, our viewers, reflect on this, because there seems to be some kind of justification people try to make not to really believe in the existence of a creator, not to be involved in practicing a...
No, it's not about not having a justification or trying to create a justification not to believe. It's saying you haven't provided a justification to believe, and you haven't. It's been the usual Dawah garbage. And again, it's just classic, shifting the burden of proof kind of thing.
Yeah.
A certain way of life as determined by the creator to expect a life hereafter. So these are justifications, and it looks like all of these justifications, one by one, they are not coherent, and they are not something that one can justify and keep on holding this belief. So
I mean, that's the real irony, isn't it? That for him to accuse the other guy of not being coherent with all the babble that's come out of him, and particularly his mate there. Yeah, I mean, that's a joke.
Yeah, and what does he mean by coherent? There's some contradiction. If there is, spell out the contradiction. You know, they make these sort of claims and they're not pressed on it, right? If it's not coherent, I understand that to mean that there's some sort of contradiction. And if you're not saying that, then what he's really saying is, I just find it implausible, or it doesn't sit well with me. So what? Who cares? The guy didn't come to convince you here. You asked him questions.
Exactly.
Let us keep reflecting on these things, and hopefully, inshallah, God willing, people will, using their critical thinking, come to the realization that there indeed is a creator who is the originator, the source of all things, originated us for a noble purpose in which we will worship God alone without ascribing any partners.
A couple of things there. One, I mean, you know, claiming that you're doing the critical thinking again is just a joke. And but
Yes,
secondly, just that
I did have to giggle at that one.
yeah, no, I did. Yeah, I heard you there. But also just that last little bit there where he's talking about it's a noble purpose, and then that purpose is to worship God. It's off topic, but since he's brought it up, why is that considered a noble purpose?
Exactly.
There's no reason to think of it in that way that has ever convinced me. Even if this God does exist, I think it's something very ignoble about it wanting you to spend, you know, creating you just to worship it. That sounds like the height of, you know, arrogance and the height of kind of insecurity, that's what you need to do. There's nothing noble about this as far as I can see.
No, I absolutely agree with you. The idea of critical thinking, I'm not sure that they know how to do that. But, you know, a lot of people think they can do it. And I think between you and I think it's clear that many of these people at Dawah's, at Speaker's Corner can't do that. But I absolutely agree with you. As soon as you said this thing, this noble purpose of worship, I think that that's a wicked idea. And any being, and the reason they claim that it's worship is because he created you. Okay, if I thought I had a good life and it's worth it, then I'm going to be grateful, but I'm not going to be eternally grateful. And I don't expect an all good being to keep telling me that I have to pray and tell it how wonderful it is all the time. It's like, you know, the being feels like it's lacking something or other, right? It's almost, that's what a narcissistic type personality does. It wants to sort of worship. I always use my Kim Jong-un analogy, and I say to people like him and others, give me the relevant moral difference between Kim Jong-un and God, either the Christian or Muslim God. Because if Kim Jong-un had the power of God, he'd act in the same way, as far as I can tell, that, you know, your God does. He's only got the power of a North Korea, but everything he says is good. Whatever, you know, he gets worship. People cry on the streets and all this sort of stuff. And no, nobody would want to worship that. And then they tell you about his power and they don't really understand what's being said. I've never had a response that I've gone, okay, that's interesting, I'll think about that. They misunderstand this whole thing when I use the Kim Jong-un analogy. But no, I don't think worship is a good thing. I think being grateful for something is fine. But again, somebody not demanding gratitude day after day, or prayer, if they want to equate the two, I think that's an evil thing. So no, I don't think it's noble. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and on top of that, it just seems like an incredible waste of time. And because they are the first ones who will say, well, God doesn't actually need you to worship him. Well, then what's the point? Why bother? I mean, it just sounds like an incredible waste of time. If this being has created you, surely wants you to go out and be doing more interesting things, you know, experiencing the beauty of life or something, not down on your knees begging every 10 minutes. It's just, yeah, it sounds like a waste of time.
Without any associates, and if we do so, then God has promised us hereafter, where there's eternal pleasure, paradise, under which rivers flow, where is no suffering, no pain, but bliss, tranquility, and contentment and happiness. But if you don't do that, if you don't believe and adhere to,
just stop it there for a sec. Just, it's a shame we don't have that already, right? And then they want to go through the test. Then I'll go through my what I think is a really strong, if not a knockdown argument against this idea of the test. So yeah, it's a shame we don't have that already. Instead, we've got a lot of suffering and unpleasantness.
Yeah, and to sort of piggyback onto that, because I think this very last bit, he's about to say, but if you don't, you're going to get the hellfire, which is what a wonderful God. He's like promising you this perfect life, but he's also willing to scorch you for basically no good reason. But let's just play the last bit just to confirm that's where he's going.
In oneness of God and accepting his existence, and you believe in God having a daughter, for example, or a wife, or a son, or many gods, or no gods, then your fate is determined, because God has already prescribed that he will not forgive the association with him in his divine reality, and hellfire will be their only destination. Let us hope that we, all of us, are removed and safe from this hellfire. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر لكم وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
The final threat of hellfire at the end.
Exactly.
What
a fitting way for these guys to end.
Rob, I'm just sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say that wasn't even dumber reason than I thought he was going to go for. I just thought he was going to say, like, if you don't believe in God, then you're going to get this hellfire. No, he started to sort of aim it at the Christians or the polytheists by saying, oh, if you believe, God has a child, or if you believe there's multiple gods, you're still going to burn. So even if you do believe in God, but you don't do it in quite their way, you're also going to burn. So it was an even worse ending than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, typical, and when I say fitting for them end, the threat of hellfire. Lovely. Yeah, just the sort of thing to put fear into people who don't think critically, and to drive you and I further away from this, false and, to be fair, ugly religion.
It is fitting. It is perfect in that way because it tells you what it's all about. It's this is not about comfort. This is about terror, essentially, terrifying people. Do you want to summarize what we've watched tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the typical low-level sort of Dawah apologetics, and Mansur's apparently been going there for 25 years. If this is the sort of best he can do, and this is the sort of thing, he's just like a low-level, Dawah Gandhis type thing. What he has learned to do is use debate tactics, ones that I don't think are honest ones. If you're having a really good debate with somebody where you are being charitable to the other person, you're not going to employ certain things that we talked about earlier. So all in all, sort of a low-level performance. And I think the other guy, not only did he have to go, but he probably got bored. And I think it was, as usual, a pretty poor performance by those guys.
Yeah. I'm not really sure I can add that much. I mean, basically, what was it? It was a Pascal's wager argument with an even worse than usual analogy to try to justify it. The something from nothing garbage, which has just been defeated. Not only has it been defeated, you can tell that he doesn't really understand the concepts that he's trying to talk about. And then, the sort of final wrap up of, it's great to worship God, and if you don't, you're going to burn in hell. Rob, have you got any last words you want to add? Or?
No, I think you've summarized it extremely well. And as always, been a pleasure to do a review with you, and I hope to do one again in the very near future. And thanks very much to you, Drastic, for hosting this as always, and thank you if you've got this far in the video. I appreciate you getting to the end with us.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Rob, and I will see everybody else in the next one.